During a heated live interview, Congressman Al Green boldly declared his intention to impeach President Trump once again. But just as tensions reached their peak, Texas Governor Greg Abbott stunned the entire room with a powerful emotional response that no one expected. What he said next not only silenced critics, it left the audience in tears. The exchange was already beginning to reshape the national conversation. The set of America Tonight felt unusually tense. Bright lights, cameras rolling, and millions watching across the country. Host Carla Jennings had barely finished introducing the segment when Congressman Al Green leaned forward in his chair, his voice already trembling with emotion. "I'm filing another article of impeachment against Donald Trump today," Green declared. Greg Abbott, seated across from him, remained calm, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Carla blinked. "Congressman, you've tried this before." "I don't care," Green snapped. "He's a racist, a fraud, a danger to this country, and if I have to try 100 times, I will. He is not fit to sit in that White House." Abbott's hands folded together on the desk. He didn't interrupt. "Not yet." Green pointed a finger toward the camera. "Trump is a low IQ man with no heart, a divider. The world laughs at us because of him." Gasps rippled through the studio. Carla tried to interject, but Green cut her off again. "I will not stop until Donald Trump is removed from office." That was the moment Abbott raised his head and quietly said, "Enough." You could feel it in the air. Something was coming, and no one was ready for it. The studio went dead silent. Carla stared at Abbott in surprise. Even Green leaned back, blinking as if unsure he'd heard correctly. Abbott's voice, calm but laced with fire, pierced through the silence. "You say you'll try 100 times to impeach President Trump?" Abbott began slowly. "But tell me, Congressman, what have you done for the people who elected you? You've been in office for over 20 years. Can you name one thing that's truly changed a life for the better in your district?" Green scoffed. "Nothing," Abbott shot back, his words cutting through the tension like a blade. "You've wasted 2 decades chasing cameras, fighting a man who's been trying to fix what you and your allies broke." Green's face twitched. Abbott leaned forward. "You call him dumb? He's strengthened our borders. He's deporting violent criminals your party welcomed in. He brought jobs back to American towns, including right here in Texas. He brought hope back in just 7 months." A quiet tear rolled down the cheek of an older woman in the audience. The cameraman caught it as Green shifted uncomfortably. "You call him racist," Abbott said, his voice breaking slightly. "But who signed the deals that revitalized struggling communities? Who cut taxes for the working poor?" "Not you, Congressman." The room seemed to stop breathing. Abbott wasn't finished. Leaning closer to the microphone, his voice grew firmer, but it still carried the kind of pain that made hearts ache. "Congressman Green, if you truly love this country, if you truly love Texas, you'd be helping us clean up the mess left by Biden's administration, not attacking the man fixing it." Green tried to speak, but Abbott's voice now commanded the room. "You say Trump is unfit? Then let's tell the American people and the people of Texas what you're hiding, what no one has dared to say on live TV until now." Abbott took a slow, steady breath. Under President Biden, America was on life support. But Biden wasn't running the show, was he? His decline was covered up by people like you. He signed deals he didn't even read, deals you wrote. You used AutoPen to make millions disappear. You used a man's illness and enrich yourselves. Gasps erupted, real ones. The audience was trembling. "You betrayed America," Abbott said, his voice low but searing. "While President Trump was building, you were stealing. And now you smear him to protect yourself." Al Green's hands shook. Carla sat frozen in her chair. Governor Greg Abbott's next words would hit even harder, and America was about to cry together. Phones buzzed across the country. Clips of Abbott's words were already flooding social media before the segment even ended. On X and other platforms, hashtags like #AbbotSpeaksTruth and #GreenExposed began trending. Inside the studio, the tension thickened. Representative Green's face turned pale. In all his years, he had never been challenged this directly, and on live television, no less. Host Carla Jennings struggled to regain control. "Governor Abbott, those are serious accusations," she said cautiously. Abbott didn't flinch. "Yes," he replied, "and every word I've spoken is true. I'll say more if America and Texas are ready to hear it. Green snapped back. You're trying to cover for a criminal. Abbott turned toward him slowly. You think President Trump is a criminal because he ended your little game. He closed the loopholes, he stood in your way. And that's your real problem. Green's hands clenched. You're lying. Abbott stood. His voice dropped, but the words were like steel. I'm not the one who signed off on millions using Biden's auto pen while he couldn't even remember where he was. You did that, Congressman. You and your friends. And when Trump came to stop it, you screamed racism to distract from your crimes. The room went silent again. Green had no words. A soft sniffle echoed from the studio audience, then another. An older man in a veteran's jacket wiped his eyes. He's telling the truth, the veteran whispered to the woman next to him. Abbott looked around, making eye contact with the audience, not the cameras. You all know what I'm saying is real. You've felt it. You've lived it. He stepped forward, now standing between Carla and Green. His voice broke slightly. I watched my mother cry over unpaid bills. I saw my neighbors lose their homes while people like Al Green sat in Congress, smiling for cameras, but doing nothing to stop the bleeding. Green looked like he wanted to respond, but the words weren't there. President Trump didn't have to run again, Abbott continued. He could have walked away, but he came back for all of you then, because you still had pain. You still had dreams being crushed, and he refused to watch it happen again. A woman in the front row stood, wiping her tears. God bless you, Governor Abbott, she whispered. Abbott nodded to her. This isn't about party. It's about truth, and it's time to tell it. The crowd erupted in quiet applause. Green looked cornered. Abbott had only just begun. Green finally stood, his voice trembling. This is a circus. You're attacking me because I stand for justice. Abbott turned calmly toward him. No, Congressman, I'm exposing you because justice is what you fear most. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. Would you like to explain this? Carla leaned forward. What is that? Abbott held up a document with the government seal. A 2019 internal audit showing millions missing from federal housing grants in your district. Money meant for poor families. Signed by you and funneled into shell companies tied to your campaign donors. Gasps swept through the studio. Green's eyes darted nervously. Abbott took a breath. You think this country belongs to you and your corrupt club? It doesn't. It belongs to the mothers in Houston, to the veterans in Lubbock, to the oil field workers in Midland who just want a fair shot. His voice cracked again, raw, real. It belongs to them, not to you. Tears welled in Carla's eyes. Green opened his mouth, but no words came. Abbott had shattered the silence with truth, and America and Texas were finally listening. Outside the studio, a crowd had already gathered. Dozens stood in front of a massive screen on Congress Avenue in Austin, watching the live feed. Some held umbrellas in the drizzle. Others simply covered their mouths in shock. He said it, one man whispered. He actually said it out loud. Inside, Abbott stood firm, not shaken by Al Green's insults, but strengthened by them. Governor Abbott, Carla asked, what do you want people watching this to understand? Abbott turned to the camera slowly. That truth doesn't need permission, and justice doesn't care how long you've sat in a leather chair in Congress. He turned his gaze toward Green. Tell them about the money funneled through community programs that never even existed. Tell them how you buried bills meant to fix broken Texas schools while you were flying first class. Green's lips tightened. He looked down. Abbott took a breath. You call Trump dumb? No, what's dumb is thinking Texans and Americans wouldn't find out. Outside the studio, an elderly woman sobbed into her scarf. This is why I voted for Trump again, she whispered. The story was spreading like wildfire, and the nation was beginning to see who the real villain was. Abbott slowly reached into his coat again. I didn't come here with just facts, he said. I came here with pain, with the truth of the people I've met. He pulled out a folded envelope. This is a letter from a father in El Paso, Abbott said. He asked me to read it. Green rolled his eyes. More stunts. Abbott ignored him and unfolded the letter. Dear Governor Abbott, my daughter died last year. An illegal immigrant with 5 prior arrests hit her with a stolen truck. That man had been released twice under Biden's sanctuary policies, the same policies supported by men like Congressman Green. Trump's team tried to visit me after the funeral. I told them no, but 7 months into this new presidency, I finally see something changing. I see my country waking up. Thank you. Keep fighting for all of us. Abbott's voice cracked as he finished. The studio was silent. Several crew members wiped their eyes. Even Green looked shaken. For the first time, the camera caught him blinking back tears. The letter didn't just pierce hearts. It opened them. Abbott folded the letter and held it close to his chest. He looked at Green, but his voice was no longer sharp. It was soft, almost broken. You've mocked Trump. You've mocked me. But what you don't understand is, you weren't mocking politicians. You were mocking the people we serve. Abbott stepped forward. You called him a racist, a clown, dumb. But he stood in that Oval Office day after day knowing you and others wanted him destroyed. And still, he signed bills to help working families. He stood at the Texas border. He held the hands of crying parents whose children were taken by violence your policies encouraged. Abbott's voice cracked harder now, his hands trembling. My uncle was a rancher. He died broke. The cattle market collapsed because of trade policies people like you signed. He never got a second chance. But Trump is giving other men like him one. Abbott looked straight into the camera. This isn't politics anymore. This is life. And I'm done pretending you're a public servant when all you've served is yourself. Tears rolled down the cheeks of a young girl in the audience. The country was crying now, and Abbott stood tall with them. Green tried to smile, but his lips twitched. He reached for his water, his hands shaking. Those are just conspiracy theories, he mumbled. Abbott turned to Carla. Would you like me to read from the financial report from 2022? It lists exactly where the money went from Green's so-called community housing initiative. Over $9 million gone. Gasps echoed through the studio. Carla hesitated, then nodded. Show us. Abbott handed her a folder. Pages 6, 8, and 12, he said steadily. The company that received the money doesn't even exist. No address, no phone number, but it's somehow paid for a vacation home in the Cayman Islands under the name of Green's top donor. Green's jaw dropped. Check it, Abbott said firmly. It's all public, just buried where most Americans and most Texans wouldn't think to look. The audience stirred. People at home were rewinding, screenshotting, Googling. For years, Al Green had barked about justice. But now the world, and Texas, saw who he really was. Eyes wide, hearts pounding, America waited for what Abbott would reveal next. Because this wasn't just politics anymore. This was a national awakening. Abbott sat back for a moment, discreetly wiping his eyes before anyone noticed. But the pain was too raw now, too real. Abbott looked at Al Green with no hatred, only deep disappointment. You call Trump dumb, you call him unfit, but maybe it's you who should be examined. Green scoffed. Excuse me? Abbott stood again, his tone unwavering. No sane man, no man who truly loves this country, would fight this hard to remove a president who's fighting to fix it, unless he has something to hide. Abbott turned toward the big screen in the studio. You watched as fentanyl poured across the Texas border during the Biden years. You stayed quiet. You watched Texas factories and refineries shut down while China grew richer. You stayed silent. You let it all rot. And now that Trump is rebuilding, you scream impeachment. His voice trembled with emotion. I've met families who've buried their children. I've met oil field workers who haven't had a raise in 15 years. I've seen exactly what your silence has cost. The room wasn't just quiet now, it was mourning. Carla's hands were over her mouth. Even the cameramen had tears in their eyes. And Abbott, he wasn't just a governor in that moment. He was the voice of the forgotten. A small, hesitant voice broke the silence. From the front row, a boy, no more than 10, stood beside his mother, holding her hand tightly. Governor Abbott, the boy said shyly. Abbott looked at him. My daddy lost his job 2 years ago. We almost lost our house. But this year, he got work again. He says it's because of Trump. Is that true? Abbott's throat tightened. He lowered himself slightly in his chair so he could look the boy in the eyes. Yes, Abbott said, his voice shaking. That's true. The boy smiled. His mother began to cry. Green looked stunned. He wasn't just losing a debate anymore. He was watching hearts turn one by one. Abbott stood tall again. "I didn't come here to fight," he said. "I came here to speak for people like him, people your policies crushed, families your corruption ignored." The boy's question wasn't planned, but it became the moment that pierced every viewer's heart. Across Texas and America, tears fell silently. Not for Abbott, not for Trump, but for every forgotten voice finally being heard. And Abbott made sure they would never be forgotten again. Representative Al Green looked trapped, and for the first time in his long political career, the cameras weren't protecting him. He stood awkwardly, glancing at Carla, hoping for a lifeline, but she couldn't give it. The truth was too loud now. Abbott stepped forward again, calm, brave, carrying the voices of millions. "You've abused your office, Congressman. You've used your seat to enrich yourself, not to serve your people." Green lashed out. "You're just a puppet for Trump. You're protecting him because he made you relevant." Abbott shook his head slowly. "No, I stood by him because I watched him take hits for you. I saw him sign orders in the dark, getting no thanks, only attacks. And I see the progress now. Border security returning, jobs coming back, pride being restored." The audience began clapping softly. Abbott turned toward the camera again. "This isn't about revenge. This is about redemption for a country that was almost lost." Green's mouth opened, but he had no defense. Not anymore. The studio and the country knew this wasn't Abbott fighting anymore. This was Abbott healing America. A studio staffer hurried over to Carla, whispering something in her ear. She looked stunned. We're receiving breaking news," Carla said, her voice shaking. She turned to Abbott. "Governor Abbott, your office has just released official documents, tax filings, and property records confirming that shell corporations tied to Congressman Green's longtime aide were dissolved this morning, just hours before this interview began." Gasps swept through the studio. Abbott raised an eyebrow. Why would an innocent man start erasing records unless he knew the truth was coming? Green's face turned pale. Carla looked at him. "Congressman, do you have a response?" Silence. For the first time, Al Green, who had always shouted, always interrupted, couldn't speak. Abbott stepped forward, his tone low and deliberate. "You've spent 2 decades chasing President Trump with lies, all while hiding the very crimes you now fear being exposed." He scanned the room, his eyes meeting those of the audience. But the people of Texas, the American people, are awake now, and they're done being lied to. Around him, people were standing, crying, nodding in agreement. The man who claimed Trump was unfit had just been stripped bare, and the world was watching it unfold live. Abbott took a long, steady breath. He was emotional but still composed. "You know what hurts most, Congressman?" He said that hi, son. He said, "You didn't just lie to us. You betrayed the very people who needed you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. "This is Evelyn Marks," Abbott said, holding it up to the cameras. "A 74-year-old widow from your own district. Her home collapsed because the housing grant she was promised never arrived. That grant was approved, but it never reached her." Abbott's voice tightened. "She died in that building alone, in the cold, while you were at a fundraiser." A collective gasp filled the room. Abbott looked straight at Green. "So don't talk to me about impeachment. You should be talking about repentance." Even Carla Jennings was wiping away tears. Outside, the crowd was growing, watching the live broadcast on a massive screen in Austin, cheering, weeping, praying. Abbott wasn't grandstanding. He was leading. Green slowly sat down, defeated, his head lowered. Not out of shame, because shame would have meant he cared. Abbott's voice rang out one last time in that moment. "Texas deserves better. America deserves better. And this is just the beginning." Shockwaves rippled through Washington, D.C. Inside congressional offices, phones rang nonstop. Aides scrambled. Reporters huddled around monitors, watching the viral clip. "What did he just do?" one staffer whispered. "He exposed the whole game," another replied. Back in the studio, Abbott stood quietly. He had spoken his truth, but the nation's response was only just beginning. On social media, #AbbottSpeaks, truth climbed to the #1 trend, not for controversy, but for courage. One tweet read, "I've never cried watching politics. Greg Abbott just made me believe in leadership again. Carla Jennings finally turned to Green. Congressman, do you still wish to proceed with your impeachment article? Green didn't answer. He just stared at the floor. Outside, the crowd had doubled. People waved handmade signs that read, "Truth matters. Abbott speaks for me." A woman wrapped in a Texas flag shouted through her tears, "He fought for my son." Inside the studio, Abbott looked up toward the ceiling, whispered something only God could hear, and sat down. For the first time, the silence wasn't awkward. It was sacred. 10 minutes after the interview ended, Abbott's phone buzzed. Governor, an aide said, "The president wants to speak with you." Abbott stepped aside and answered. Trump's voice was steady, serious, full of pride. "You didn't just defend me," Trump said. "You defended the American people. You did what no one else had the guts to do on live TV." Abbott exhaled, letting his shoulders finally relax. "I just told the truth, sir." Trump paused. "And you did it like a lion." Outside, the crowd was still chanting. Inside, the production crew stood and applauded. Even Carla Jennings, a seasoned anchor, wiped her eyes and whispered to her producer, "That man is going to change history." Abbott hung up the phone and looked around the studio one last time. Al Green had slipped out quietly during the break. No headlines, no outrage, no statement. Only shame. The nation wasn't talking about impeachment anymore. They were talking about integrity, and how, in one unforgettable moment, a Texas governor stood up and reminded America what real leadership looks like. That evening, clips of the broadcast aired on every major network. It wasn't labeled political drama or partisan debate. It was called what it truly was, a national reckoning. In homes across Texas and the rest of the country, families sat together and rewatched the interview. Veterans saluted their screens. Ranchers stood still in barns. Single moms wiped their faces with napkins while stirring pots of chili. One boy asked his father, "Dad, is Greg Abbott the good guy?" His father, who hadn't cried in years, nodded. "He is, son. He really is." The next day, that same boy drew Abbott's face in school, not as a superhero in a cape, but as a real man who told the truth. Back in Washington, something had shifted. Members of Congress who had stayed silent began to speak out. Whistleblowers came forward. Journalists started connecting dots no one had dared to touch before. Abbott's words hadn't just brought tears, they'd sparked hope. For the first time in years, millions felt like they had a voice again. And that voice belonged to the governor of Texas. That night, something remarkable happened. In one of the largest newsroom offices in D.C., a young producer stood up during a strategy meeting. "Why haven't we ever covered this side of the story?" she asked, pointing at Abbott's emotional takedown of Representative Al Green. The room fell silent. Finally, one editor admitted, "Because we were afraid to. Until now." By morning, 3 major outlets broke rank and began airing full, uncut clips of Abbott's interview. Not edited, not twisted, just raw truth. Meanwhile, Al Green's office went into lockdown. No statement was given. His social media accounts went silent. Whispers inside the Capitol claimed the Ethics Committee had quietly opened an internal investigation. But the American people weren't waiting. They flooded Abbott's official page with messages of support. "Thank you for speaking for us. You made my father cry for the first time since his deployment. You're not just the governor, you're the heart of this nation." Inside his Austin hotel room, Abbott sat alone, staring out the window at the city lights. He hadn't planned to go viral. He had simply told the truth. But now it was shaking the system. Back in the Capitol, tension hung in the air like thick smoke. Lawmakers passed each other in the halls, avoiding eye contact. The old order had been rattled, and it all traced back to Abbott. One Democratic congresswoman, normally loyal to party lines, quietly pulled him aside near the rotunda. "I may not agree with you on everything," she said, "but what you did, it was brave, and it was right." Abbott nodded. "Thank you." She leaned in closer. "You just made it impossible for the lies to continue." Word spread quickly that several House members were reconsidering their stance on impeachment. Some even called for Representative Al Green to be held accountable for misuse of funds and breach of public trust. Meanwhile, Abbott's words continued to echo across the country. Schools played the interview in civics classes. Veterans groups issued statements of support. Even families who hadn't voted in decades began registering again. Not for a party, but for a principle. America wasn't watching just a politician anymore. They were watching a protector. And Abbott had only just begun exposing the corruption many thought would never see daylight. In a small town outside Lubbock, a single mother named Rhonda uploaded a video. She sat at her kitchen table, her 3 kids eating breakfast behind her. Her voice cracked as she spoke into the camera. "I never thought I'd post something like this," she began. "But Governor Abbott, I need you to hear this." She held up a photo of her late husband, a West Texas oil field worker who died in 2021 after his benefits were cut. "President Trump and you, Governor, helped bring jobs back. My oldest just got hired last week," and he finally smiled again. Today, for the first time in years, I felt like someone in government actually saw me, saw my pain, and didn't just use it to win votes. Her voice trembled. "Thank you for speaking for us." Within hours, Rhonda's video had over 7 million views. Abbott watched it alone in his Austin hotel room, his hand pressed to his chest, eyes red. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about restoring what was broken, and the world could feel it. At St. Mary's VA Hospital in Dallas, a war veteran named Earl Dawson watched the full interview from his hospital bed. His lungs were weak, his body tired, but his heart, it beat stronger than it had in years. He waved at the nurse and asked for a phone, and his voice was raspy but steady as he began recording. "I served under 4 presidents. Got a Purple Heart in '03. I've seen men lie to save their careers. But tonight, I saw a man cry to save his country." He paused, wiping a tear. "Governor Abbott, if you ever see this, just know this old soldier believes in you. And I haven't said that about any politician in 30 years. Earl's daughter uploaded the video with the title, "A Veteran's Thanks to Greg Abbott." In 6 hours, it hit 12 million views. People began using the hashtag, #WeStandWithAbbott. News outlets couldn't spin it. Even those who had been harsh critics admitted, the emotion is too raw, the truth too heavy to ignore. What had started as a heated interview had now become a healing movement, and Abbott's voice had become the pulse of a nation rediscovering its heart. By sunrise, every major news network had cleared space for one thing: the full replay of Governor Abbott's confrontation with Rep. Al Green. No shouting panels, no distractions, just one man defending truth, with tears in his eyes. In classrooms, teachers paused lessons to show students what courage looked like. In barbershops and diners, old men nodded silently at the screen. One woman in Georgia tweeted, "My mom watched this clip 5 times. She's 78. She cried every single time." Meanwhile, whispers from inside the Justice Department confirmed that subpoenas were being prepared to investigate the financial trail Abbott had exposed live on air, not just against Al Green, but others that tied to the hidden network he had hinted at. In less than 24 hours, America had turned a page. People weren't talking about impeachment anymore. They were asking why it had taken this long for someone like Abbott to speak up. Back home in Austin, Abbott's wife Cecilia held his hand as their children played nearby. "You changed something tonight," she whispered. He didn't respond right away. Deep down, he knew this wasn't the end of the battle. It was the beginning of America's comeback. On a radio show in San Francisco, a well-known liberal commentator, someone who had never once said a kind word about Trump or Abbott, cleared his throat live on air. "I don't care what side you're on," he said. "If that moment last night didn't move you, you don't have a soul." He played the audio of Abbott reading the letter from the father whose daughter was killed by an illegal immigrant, followed by the photo of Evelyn Marks, the elderly Texas woman who died in the cold after her grant was stolen. "I watched that clip and I cried," he admitted, "because for once, I saw a politician put people above power." Listeners called in, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, all echoing the same message: he spoke for us. Back in Washington, Abbott stood outside the Capitol as reporters swarmed. He wasn't bragging, he wasn't celebrating. "This isn't about me," Abbott told them. "This is about what we lost and what we're fighting to get back." And for the first time in years, the crowd didn't just clap. They wept, because Abbott didn't just speak like a leader. He bled like one. That Sunday morning, in towns across Texas and the rest of the country, something incredible happened. Pastors and priests set aside their pre-written sermons and played the Abbott interview instead. In a small church in Waco, Pastor Neil stood before his congregation. "This isn't a political speech," he said. "It's a cry for truth, and we all need to hear it." Mothers cried softly into tissues. Fathers nodded with pride. Teenagers who had never cared about politics sat still, eyes locked on the screen. Representative Al Green had used his seat to cling to power. Abbott's voice echoed through the church halls that morning. We were never meant to worship power. We were meant to serve the people. Church bells rang louder than usual, not for ceremony, but for awakening. Outside the chapel, an elderly black woman was seen hugging a Trump supporter for the first time in her life. He spoke for my son, she whispered. I don't care who he works with. He spoke truth. Across Texas and the nation, people of every color, class, and background were united by one man's courage. And the story wasn't over. Abbott's fight was still unfolding, and the final blow to corruption was about to land. Late Sunday night, Abbott's office released a final piece of evidence. It had never been meant for the public, but now it had to be seen. It was security camera footage. Time-stamped and authenticated, showing Congressman Al Green meeting in a private Austin lounge with two lobbyists tied to the very shell, corporations Abbott had named earlier. The date? Just 4 days before Green's public call for Trump's impeachment. In the footage, they shook hands. Green smiled. One of them slid him a thick envelope. When the clip aired, it appeared on every major screen in America, from Times Square to small-town diners. Even those who had defended Green for years went silent. The spin collapsed. There was no more hiding, no more deflecting, no more name-calling that could bury the truth Abbott had dragged into the light. In a brief follow-up statement, Abbott said, "Now you know why I stood up, why I couldn't stay silent any longer." Even some Democrats issued quiet apologies. A few went public, calling for Green's resignation. From the barrios of El Paso to the farmlands of Iowa, Americans felt something shift. But it wasn't fear. It was freedom. As dawn broke over Washington, the president called Abbott again. This time, the line stayed silent for a moment before Trump's voice came through, thick with emotion. "Greg, you saved this country from forgetting what it means to fight." Abbott didn't answer immediately. He stood by the window of his hotel room, looking down at the streets, where people were holding up handmade signs that read, "Truth matters. We stand with Abbott. Courage is patriotic. Thank you, Governor. Honesty is patriotic. We the people stand with you." "I did not plan this," Abbott finally replied. "I just couldn't let the lie win anymore." Trump sighed. "The whole country saw your heart. They saw your fight. They saw what it means to care more about the people than about politics." There was a pause. "America's awake now, Greg," Trump said. "And that's because of you." Abbott looked up at the Texas sunrise. "Let's finish the job, Mr. President." When the call ended, Abbott turned toward the mirror. He saw his own reflection. But what he felt was the weight of all America standing behind him. The time for truth wasn't over. The finale was just around the corner. Hours after the footage aired, the House Ethics Committee convened an emergency closed-door session. By noon, leaked documents confirmed everything Abbott had exposed: multiple financial transfers, fraudulent shell companies, and signed approvals tied directly to Representative Al Green's office. And finally, it happened. Al Green resigned. No speech, no cameras, just a short statement. "For the good of the country, I am stepping aside." But Abbott didn't see it as a victory lap. He declined every interview request that day. Instead, he traveled quietly to Houston, to the neighborhood where Evelyn Marks had once lived. Her neighbors gathered, still grieving her death. Abbott knelt down, placing white roses at the doorstep of her collapsed home. "I kept my word," he whispered. A little boy from the block walked up to him. "Mr. Abbott, my dad says you're like a superhero." Abbott smiled and knelt again. "No, buddy, superheroes fly. I just tell the truth." The image of Abbott kneeling in the street with flowers went viral. Not because of politics, but because of what it meant. Accountability had returned to America, and it was long overdue. From coast to coast, people poured into the streets, not in protest, but in relief. Flags flew on porches, churches held vigils, not for death, but for truth. One sign in Wisconsin read, "We don't worship politicians, but we honor courage." The next morning, Abbott returned to Washington. The Capitol rotunda was quieter than usual. Staffers clapped softly as he passed. Even political opponents nodded with respect. On the White House lawn, the president met him. "I never thought this would happen," Trump said. Abbott looked him in the eye. "It only happened because the people were ready to hear the truth." They stood silently for a moment, watching children run across the grass. Free, innocent, unaware that history had just shifted beneath their feet. For the first time in years, Americans believed again. Not in a party, not in a politician, but in a principle. Integrity still matters. Abbott hadn't just won a moment. He had lit a fire in the hearts of millions. And deep down, every American who had watched that interview knew this wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. That night, Abbott sat alone in his home study. He rewatched the interview, every word, every tear, every silence. Then came the moment that had shattered millions. The letter from the grieving father, the photo of Evelyn Marks, the little boy who had asked, "Is Governor Abbott the good guy?" Abbott closed his laptop. A tear slid down his cheek, not from pride, but from hope. He stepped outside, looked up at the Texas night sky, and whispered, "For everyone who's ever felt unheard, I heard you, and I always will."